Hello and welcome to Romance Over Coffee, the podcast where we talk about popular tropes and then I tell you the best books to read all over a cup of coffee, or whatever drink is in my hands that week. Each episode means a new trope we're talking about, so this week's episode is Enemies to Lovers, which is arguably one of the best and most popular tropes. This is the classic trope where the main characters hate each other's guts, something happens where they misunderstood each other and then they end up falling in love. Or were they in love the whole time because there's a fine line between love and hate? That's the real question. So what's the drink of the day? For the first episode of Romance Over Coffee, of course, the drink is a Diet Pepsi. What can I say? Anyways, let's just get right into the origin of enemies to lovers. So I was deep diving into the history of this trope, and I was really curious to where was it first seen. So of course, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, it was published in 1813, was one of the most popular enemies to lovers novels, but that was definitely not the first time we've seen enemies to lovers. But it is definitely the premise of a lot of romance books today, it inspired so many books. But I was diving deeper, and it turns out Much Ado About Nothing, the comedy by Shakespeare, has themes of enemies to lovers as well. So Beatrice and Benedict are known for arguing with each other, not really seeming to be friends at first, but they're clearly meant to be in love and they end up falling in love. So that's really early enemies to lovers. But before that, it's also been said that Shakespeare was inspired by operas. So there was an opera called Orlando Furioso that has some themes of enemies to lovers that people think inspired Shakespeare. So it dates back pretty far, 1400s vibes. But let's just get right into recommendations. So each of my favorite books has a song that I think matches perfectly. So if you like the song, you'll probably like the book. And for recommendations, we have 3 categories: YA, contemporary, and fantasy. And then each have 2 to 3 books that I think you guys would love or need to read. So starting off, we're going to start off with young adult. So first off, we have Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. So if you like the song New Year's Day by Taylor Swift, you will love Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. This book is about Liz Buxbaum, who is a hopeless romantic and rom-com obsessed high schooler, and she shared this passion with her mom, who was a screenwriter for romance movies, but her mom had passed away years ago, and so she's still trying to cope with that through watching romance movies obsessively. So when her childhood crush Michael comes back into town, she is determined for him to ask her to prom. But she doesn't know how to get his attention without him still seeing her as little Liz. So in comes Wes Bennett, the next door neighbor, who's a smart aleck and loves baseball. He's a baseball prodigy and loves nothing more than getting on Liz's nerves. So when Liz approaches him and asks him to help get Michael to notice her, he agrees, and they put on a ruse to make people think Liz is grown up and ready for a relationship. But suddenly, his annoyingly attractive, flirty personality makes her second-guess her goal. So listen, I love this book. Anything by Lynn Painter is an immediately 5-star read for me, and I've probably reread Better Than the Movies every single year. I just cannot get enough of this book. It's so simple and funny, and Lynn Painter knows exactly how to write banter. It just had me giggling and kicking my feet the entire time. And I will say the more you read this book, the more and more you love it and fall in love with it. So would definitely recommend. And then if you love this book, she just came out with a sequel called Nothing Like the Movies that follows Wes and Liz. So I would definitely recommend picking this book up. Next up, we have Check and Mate by Allie Hazelwood. So if you like the song Mastermind by Taylor Swift, that is this book. So basically, Check and Mate is Allie Hazelwood's first YA novel that she's written, and she knocked it out of the park. So Mallory comes from a troubled family. Her mom is sick and her dad's not in the picture, and her family's fallen apart, and that's literally basically all because of chess. So that leaves Mallory trying to figure out how to pay the bills, take care of her family, all after just graduating high school. But suddenly she finds herself doing the one thing she swore off of, which is playing chess. She plays in a chess competition for charity and ends up beating Nolan Sawyer, who's known as like the king killer. He's like, in the chess world, he is like the top of the top. Nobody can beat him. And he does it with ease, so to say. Like, it seems like it's so easy for him. But of course, Mallory beats him. And so he doesn't know what to do with that information. He's kind of intrigued. And then Mallory realizes that if she keeps winning competitions, she gets big checks that pay bills for her family. So she ends up putting her personal feelings about chess aside and plays the game, and ends up going to the same school Nolan goes to, and is like, or went to, I'm not quite sure, I don't remember. But this is like, but Nolan isn't used to being challenged, and for some reason he cannot stay away from Mallory. Like, he wants to know everything about her. So listen, I will eat up anything by Ellie Hazelwood, and she's the kind of author that you read her books and like you immediately feel smarter by reading what she's writes down. Like, she's so intelligent. She's an intelligent author. She like knows exactly, she has enemies to lovers down to a T, honestly. Like, most of her books are enemies to lovers, and I will eat it up every single time. Like, Love Hypothesis, Love Theoretically, those are all contemporary books that she's written that are enemies to lovers, and so good. Women in STEM all the way. Next, we have our contemporary books. So these are all going to be more mature books. They may have some spice in them, so just be warned. So first up, we have The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. If you like Ain't No Rest for the Wicked by Cage the Elephant, that song perfectly describes this book. So basically, Rowan Kane is a grumpy, get-her-done kind of guy, and when his grandfather, who is the owner of Dreamland, passes away, he leaves literally everything that Kane has wanted to him under one condition. He has 6 months to renovate the Dreamland parks and restore its magic, so to say. So he's like, fine, I will do that if that means I get all this money and like all these things that I wanted. So on his first day on the job, he meets this annoying, super hyper, way too energetic woman named Zara, who works at Dreamland as a makeup artist. So she does the little girls' face paint and makes them look like a princess and gives them makeovers. And she loves her job. She loves Dreamland, and it's part of her childhood growing up. So Rowan needs all the help he can get, and Zara seems to know a lot about the parks. So despite him not liking her, he ends up hiring her to help him. And they have to spend a lot of time together to figure out what the park needs, and Zara has her work cut out for her because Rowan Kane is the grumpiest of all grumpies, literally. But turns out they've misjudged each other, and they start liking each other more and more than they originally thought. The Fine Print was my only personality trait when I was in high school. I read this book, and it immediately became my favorite book. I would not shut up about it, and everything I did was based off this book. My senior year of high school, I was the editor-in-chief of the yearbook, and I got to decide our theme. So it was literally The Fine Print. And then for graduation, I got earrings that had The Fine Print on them. I took my senior pictures with The Fine Print book in Barnes & Noble. Like, I don't know what it was, but this book just, like, I was obsessed. And I did, like, any single project that had to be based off of books. This was the book I was talking about. I don't know what it was about this book, but it just touched my soul. Like, if I were to get a tattoo, it would be of this. And this whole series, honestly. The Dreamland Billionaire series is just everything. I love the character development. I love how deep it gets, and just the character arc for Rowan is just amazing. So would definitely recommend. Next up is Beach Read by Emily Henry. So if you like the song Rider in the Dark by Lorde, that is this book, like, definitely amazing. So basically, January is a romance writer who no longer believes in a love, but has a deadline quickly approaching for her novel coming up. And Gus is a well-known literary writer who's stuck in a rut, and January's sworn enemy. So the lake houses that they're both staking out in to hunker down and finish these books end up being right next to each other. And one night, January storms over to his place to give her peace of mind after he's being too loud, and they end up making a deal to help each other finish their books. So this summer-long challenge forces Gus to go on dates with her for research for her book, and January has to help him conduct research and interviews for this, I don't know, nonfiction book that he's writing. And they end up spending a lot of time with each other, but they could never make a relationship work, right? With their competition. Guys, this is one of my favorite Emily Henry novels, and this is a debated topic in the book community, what your favorite Emily Henry book is. But I think it's always going to be Beach Read for me. Like, it just comes from such a special place in my heart. And the last scene in this book gets me every single time. If you know, you know. Like, I'll pick this book up off my shelf randomly and just read the last few pages just to feel something again. I cannot with this book. It's so amazing. I just love their character development and their banter and all of the adventures that they go on throughout the book. So if you want to get into the Emily Henry universe, I would definitely recommend Beach Read. Next, I'm just going to spitball some other titles that you guys should pick up that I love but don't really want to delve too deep into. So next, I'm going to tell you should read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. And then there's also a movie based off of this book that I think does a great job, like encapsulates the whole book. I think it's really good. So would recommend that. Also, Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. This is the first book in a trilogy. And this whole premise, this whole small town romance is just amazing. And Lucy Score knows how to write a hot, rugged man, let me just tell you. I would also recommend Love Redesigned by Lauren Asher, which is one of her newer books. Honestly, anything by Lauren Asher is amazing. She's one of my favorite authors, but Love Redesigned, also really good. I would say Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez is amazing. It's a doctor workplace romance, enemies to lovers. And then lastly, The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. Okay, last category we have today is fantasy recommendations. So I have some YA fantasy that I have to talk about because they're amazing. The first book is, of course, Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This book is amazing. There's crack cocaine in this book, I swear. Like, I could not put it down when I was reading it. Powerless is about Kai, who works for the king as the enforcer and is the king's son. And he's the enforcer, so that means he kills any ordinary who wasn't blessed with powers after the plague in the name of keeping everyone else from being infected by those who lost their powers. Kind of some confusing world building, but it's pretty easy once you get into it. And Peyton is an ordinary who pretends to be a psychic to avoid being killed, which is the same fate that her father faced like years ago, that he was killed by the enforcer. So after living on the street with her best friend for years without going noticed, she ends up being chosen for the trials, which are like basically Hunger Games vibe. They have to compete against each other in these different games, and she like lives at the palace for a while. So she's chosen to compete against people who actually have powers, and she has to convince them that she's actually a psychic, even though she's not. She's just really good at observing things. And she ends up having to compete with Kai. So she hates him, obviously, but there's something about Peyton that like can't keep Kai away from her. Guys, the banter in this book is amazing. There's like no spice because it's YA, but like it just, you can feel the tension and the chemistry in between the two main characters. And I don't know how Lauren Roberts does this, but it was just so amazing to read. Like, I just wanted to be inside Kai's mind. You know what I mean? Ugh, guys. And the second book is already out in the series, and the third book's coming out soon, so I cannot wait to read it. But I would definitely recommend, if you're just looking for an easy romance book to pick up with like not too much world building, I would definitely recommend Powerless. Next, I have to say, just Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer is an amazing book. It's also YA, I believe, and I recently picked it up just kind of like off the cuff. But I loved that book so much. The banter and, you know, anything for like a broody, grumpy, everybody hates me villain, and the like bubbly, giddy heroine who's like, I don't know, makes him question everything about who he is because she makes him feel all these gushy feelings. Like, I'll eat it up every time. So that's Assistant to the Villain. And then for contemporary fantasy, I obviously have to say Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, which if you haven't read Fourth Wing, what are you doing? Everybody, guys, Fourth Wing, I think the first book, even if you don't read the second and third books, that's fine. Just read the first one and you'll be happy. This is peak enemies to lovers fantasy for me, and Alex Warren just came out with the new song Ordinary, and it's like going viral on TikTok for how amazing it describes Xaden and Violet. Like, guys, this is amazing. So definitely read Fourth Wing. So those are all the recommendations I have for enemies to lovers. There's of course so many more enemies to lovers books out there, but those are the favorites that I read so far. But next I want to just talk about movies that fit this trope well, because not everybody has time to sit down and read a book, but you can always put on a movie in the background, you know what I'm saying? So there's some, like, 3 movies that I've just loved that are enemies to lovers to a T. So the first one I have to say is The Duff, which is, like, basically better than the movie's premise. Boy next door, misunderstood girl. I just love the boy next door trope. I think it's just so, like, so fun and so bookish, you know? So definitely would recommend that. Or The Hating Game, which I talked about a little bit earlier based off the book. I think it does an amazing job putting exactly what the book was into a movie as best as you can. And lastly, I would say Red, White, and Royal Blue, the movie. I think it's on Amazon Prime. Also based off a book, but really good. Amazing. So I just spitballed a bunch of books off at you guys, but you may be asking, so what's your absolute favorite book out of all of these? Listen, that's an impossible question, and how dare you ask me that, even though I'm the one that wrote that question down. But if I had, like, gun to my head, if I had to pick one, I would say, I'd have to say Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. Like, I think that's just such a, but I don't know, the fine print was just, like, such a era for me. Okay, probably right now, probably Better Than the Movies. I love it. I love Wes and Liz so much. Just everything. You guys can find my Spotify playlist of all of the enemies to lovers songs that I think fit this trope well, linked in the bio wherever you're listening to your podcast. And I hope you found at least one book that you want to pick up after this. And I'm going to go finish my Diet Pepsi now. Stay reading.